The briefcase. Part 3 of 4. Mateo did not scream. He had always considered himself a rational man, and rational men do not scream in train corridors of 1:40 in the morning. What he did was take a very sharp breath through his nose and step backward and put his back against the car 6 door and keep his eyes on the figure and not blink. The figure did not advance. It stood in the connector passage with its 2 long hands at its sides and its white eyes and its spreading chest stain, and it waited. And after what felt like a very long time, the train lurched sideways on a curve, and the swinging overhead light caught the figure's face at a new angle, and Mateo saw something he had not seen before. The figure's face had a scar, a faded diagonal scar on the left side of the chin, running from the corner of the jaw toward the lip. Mateo put his hand to his own face, his own scar, his own left chin, identical in placement, identical in angle. He stared at it. The figure stared back, and Mateo realized with a lurching, sick clarity that the figure's features were not those of Farouk Benmansour. They were in their structure, the cheekbones, the jaw, the broad forehead. A version of his own face, older, decayed at the edges, the skin yellowed and creased where his was brown and firm. But his face on a body that should not exist, in a passage it should not be in, on a train in the middle of nowhere with 12 hours of desert still ahead. He stumbled back through the car 6 door. He moved fast now, past the sleeping passengers to the far end of car 6. He sat in the first empty seat he found, and he put his bag on his lap, and he pressed both hands flat against his thighs, and he breathed. He was shaking. He could feel it in his wrists. He opened his laptop. The screen came up. His spreadsheet was still open. He stared at it without reading it for almost a minute. And then, because he was a forensic accountant, and because the only thing he knew how to do with terror was to push it sideways into work, he began to look again at the data. He went back to the Benmansour disappearance file. He went back to the 2009 case notes. He had read them before, but now he was reading with different eyes. The eyes of someone who had just seen something in a connector passage that should not be possible, looking for a detail he might have missed. He found it in the secondary attachments, the ones filed by a junior investigator whose name appeared only as initials MR. A note about Benmansour's briefcase. The one that was never recovered. The note said the briefcase had contained, according to the victim's wife, a full set of financial records relating to Benmansour's active inquiry. And it described the briefcase brown leather, battered, single strap, initials embossed on the clasp. He looked at his own messenger bag on his lap. Brown leather, battered, single strap. He turned it over and looked at the clasp, and there in the brass, pressed into the metal at the factory, not his initials, not MR, but the faint ghost of letters he had never noticed before, worn nearly smooth, FB. FB Farouk Benmansour. He had bought this bag 4 years ago from a leather goods stall in the Algiers Medina. The seller had told him it was old stock. He had liked the weight of it. He had liked the worn quality of the leather. He had paid €40 and taken it home and used it every day since, and had never looked at the clasp. He turned the bag over in his hands and he looked at FB, and the world tilted slightly in a way that had nothing to do with the movement of the train. He looked up, at the far end of car 6 through the forward door, through the glass panel set into it. He could see the connector passage to car 5, lit dimly empty. He looked at the rear door of car 6, back toward car 7. The glass panel was dark. Something was blocking the light from the other side. Something tall, standing just on the other side of the glass, facing him, not moving. He looked back at the clasp, FB. He looked back at the door. Still there. He thought about the junior analyst who had written one word in a margin and then never came back to work. He thought about the access log showing the account opened at 60:14 this morning on this rail corridor. He thought about his own face on someone else's body in the connector passage, and he understood, with a cold mechanical precision that felt less like intuition and more like a balance sheet finally resolving, that he had not been assigned this case by accident. Someone had wanted a forensic accountant on this train. Someone had wanted a specific forensic accountant. Someone had chosen him deliberately and put the Delacroix file in his hands and made sure he was booked on the Zarqa Express. Because Mateo Reyes was not just any forensic accountant. He pulled his wallet from his jacket pocket and opened it, and looked at the card he had carried there since the beginning of his career but had never once thought to question. His bureau contractor ID, his license number. He had memorized the number 20 years ago. But now, with the spreadsheet open on his screen and Benmansour's initials on the clasp of his bag, he looked at the number freshly. He subtracted the year of issue. He applied the same formula he had been finding in the Delacroix ledgers, the 6.7% compounding sequence. He ran the arithmetic twice to be certain. The number that came out the other end was not a contractor ID code. It was a date, March 14, 2009. The date Farouk Benmansour disappeared. The date printed, somehow impossibly, into the license number Mateo had been assigned before the case ever existed, before Benmansour was gone, before any of this began. Someone had known. Someone had always known. And now Mateo understood that the figure with his face was not haunting him. It was warning him. That's it for part 3. Follow Untold Lores for part 4. Like and subscribe for daily stories.